down a interested to know, but it's 1,000 acres in extent, and they say that's with the tide out. When the tide is in, it's 999. They lose an acre of land when the tide comes in. That's what the book say. And it's 3 miles long, and in its widest part, it's 1.5 miles wide. There are 9 town lands here. We'll visit a number of them today, and I'll be mentioning them. And there are, last count, there were 11 houses. And there's a unique thing on Whiddy down at the other end. There are 2 lakes side by side, and one is salt water and the other is pure fresh water. This is an unusual thing. And over here, just around the point, we won't be going that way, we're going this way. There's a strand there called Cusrow, and there's a famous rock there, a large rock about the size of the table, and imprinted on it are 2 depressions, and they say the hag of Beara sat on it long, long ago and left the imprint of her, so her bottom on it. But the hag of Beara is the stories of her go back thousands of years, and she was a mighty hag. Imprint there, and in other places they have a footprint of her. And down in Castletown, there's a mighty rock, the shape of a person, and it was a saint in Castletown, blessed her and turned her into rock because she was born. But it's the hag of Beara. Also in Cusrow, in case you want to know, it's a famous place on the island for collecting carrigan moss. You know what carrigan moss is? Yes? No.
The red seaweed.
The people pick it off and store a separate parish for hundreds of years until it amalgamated. And the story of it was that in a people in Munster with immense armies and immense wealth and all that, and they decided to attack the monastery in Cong in County Mayo, and to take away the riches, which they did, and they took all the riches. And when the ecclesiastical people got onto the McCarthy's later on and said, no lads, that wasn't a fair thing to do, you must give it all back again, and you must compensate them in some way for it. And they gave back all that they had stolen, and they gave them as compensation the Inishquinga place I told you about. I think why they went for that was that the monks usually built salmon weirs and things, and here they farmed scallop, which was part of their main diet, and they were able to sell them and that. And because Inishquinga for a long time, for about 150 or 1,500 years now, it's amalgamated back into, and along with the land, they got a bell rope from every ship that came in here to moor. And a bell rope at that time, if a ship came into the harbour, they'd have to pay harbour dues, and if they hadn't paid immediately, they'd put a rope across the mouth of the harbour with a bell attached to it, so that if the ship tried to sneak out at night without paying the dues, the bell would ring and the authorities would capture them and make them pay their dues. But the monks were entitled to a bell rope from every ship that came in. The next people who came here then in great numbers were the O'Sullivans, the O'Sullivan Bears. They had vast land up in Tipperary in a place called Clough-Graffin, that's and around Cashel and Clonmel and that, and the O'Briens of Limerick were another mighty clan. They were attacking them and harassing them for a long time, and also the English who came in 1170, the Fitzgeralds and the Fitzhenrys and the Carews and all these, they were also attacking them from another side, so they squeezed the O'Sullivans, and they came down and settled in all the land around Bantry Bay down to Beara and parts of Kerry. And they came in as underlords to the McCarthys I have mentioned already. They owned the land, and the Sullivans came in and 1170, and they were a mighty strong clan and made their riches from the sea. The land at that time and that now wasn't very fit for farming and that, and there was mostly covered with forest, so they made most of their money from the sea. Anyone who fished in the bay had to pay Sullivans or give them portion of the catch, down to the smallest boat and up to the largest boat. At that time, the English fishing fleets and the Spanish and the French and the Dutch came over, like they still do, over off of Bantry Bay and fishing in Bantry Bay, and they all had to pay the O'Sullivans protection money. And if you paid them protection money, no other nationality could take your fish from you or take your boats from you, and the Sullivans made their money that way. We won't tell here today, only just to show you that they had castles in the area. They had a castle at Dunboy in Castletownbere and in Carriganas out in Cailcle, and they had a castle over on the other side of Whiddy, which there's only a stump of it left now, but if we have time we'll get to that too.
There was silence in the cars and Whiddy, couldn't they?
Well, I thought it would be in Whiddy, we'd be away from traffic congestion and that, but I don't think it's on. The next person in history that affected Whiddy Island was Mr. Cromwell, who came from England. You all know of him. In England he's a hallowed saint, I believe, and in Ireland he's the direct opposite. So you can be picky in between somewhere. But he came over and conquered all of Ireland in the 1650s, and Genshe Maru, Granul, Fuiltuck, Ergak our history told us long ago. He went with sacked towns and killed everyone, man, woman and children, and devastated the whole country, burned and killed the animals and that, so that the Irish couldn't live in the country. But anyway, he came in the 1650s, and when his wars were over, that time the soldiers and particularly the officers were rewarded by getting the spoils of war or getting land, and he gave 96,000 acres of Bantry and Beara to a Lord Anglesey. So Lord Angleseys were here. Cromwell wasn't here, but he caused the problems here. Immediately after that, then the Whites came on the scene. The Whites are the Bantry House people, as you know. The Whites were originally from Limerick, and one of the Whites, Simon, married Sholtam Dunmanway, and they went back and lived in Limerick. But some of the Whites just come down to Dunmanway on holidays, and one Richard came down and he fell in love with the Bantry area and that, and decided he'd stay here, and he leased the island from Lord Anglesey, and that was in just 1700 he moved into the island and leased the island. And he was a very industrious man, and he was married while he was here, and he had a son who was equally industrious, and they made vast fortunes from the fishing that went on here. I'll be telling you about pilchard fishing later on. They made vast money from that, and from farming, and the fishing, fish curing. They cured and exported the fish, and they cut down a lot of the forest around. There was great demand at that time for Irish oak because all the oak and birch and stuff in England had been cut out. And in the House of Commons, I believe, there are huge corridors of the house, and they're lined with Irish sides and floors of Irish oak. And some of the cathedrals in England are roofed. The timbers are Irish oak. So the oak was being cut down around the country, but they made great money out of it anyhow.
Because also you see built ships.
And they also built most of the British fleet. The ships that time were built of oak, and the Irish built most of the English ships. So the Whites had this place leased and made a lot of money, and Richard White was here, appealed to Lord Anglesey to sell him the island, and he wouldn't at a while, but after about 5 or 6 years he sold him the island. That was about 1730. He sold them the island, and they lived here for a while again, making their money. And eventually, Lord Anglesey wanted to pull out of the area and sold the 96,000 acres, plus Whiddy, plus a house that was where Bantry House is now. And the Whites took over all the land of the area, and they made their money off of the land then. They opened here on Whiddy. They kept it as a bit of a showpiece, and they had a big deer park there, and they reared very fine sheep, and which they exported the meat, and they had orchards, and it says a profitable hop yard. So I suppose they made beer and sold that too. And they introduced hares to Whiddy and wouldn't allow anyone kill them, and the hares, or their descendants, are still here, and the hunting clubs often come here and net them for horsing and that. Yeah, so that's the Whites. After that, again, 1796, we had the Wolf Tone invasion, of the French invasion, when 30 or 40 ships and 25,000 military came to conquer Ireland with the intention of moving through Ireland and conquering England. And they came in Christmas 1796, but a severe easterly gale blew up, which wouldn't allow the ships to sail up into the bay. And an easterly gale would blow out that way, so nothing could come into the bay, and the ships were dispersed, and some of them came up back of Whiddy there, and they say some of the sailors landed and got fresh foods and thing on the island. The island people say that. But why I brought that in, that's another story. The Wolf Tone thing is a big story. But Lord Bantry was, or Mr. White as he was at that time, was over in his new house, and he immediately sent word to the British forces in Cork and the British fleet that was in Cork that the French were heading towards Bantry Bay, and he also put watch people out both sides of the bay so that they'd keep an eye on the movement of the shipping. And the thing filtered out anyway because the boats were blown away, and he was rewarded for his endeavours. Then he was made a baron in 1797, and he was Viscount then later on, and then he was Lord Bantry. Is that Earl Bantry, I suppose? Lord Bantry.
Just only ask a question here for clarification. Were they not invited in to French by certain people here?
Well, they were invited in by Wolf Tone and the United Irishmen.
Right,
that's right.
okay.
Yeah. Well, the French were only too happy to come in because they always wanted to conquer England, and they were constantly at war in that period. But when they got the invitation, they decided, well, this is the best thing. We'll get an Irish welcome, and we'll come in here and they'll settle here for a while and then invade England from here. But it didn't work out that way. So immediately after the Wolf Tone thing, then I'll be showing you what we call batteries up here. They're fortifications, and the English immediately built big fortifications here and down the bay on Bear Island and in Glengariff, in case the French would come back again. Bantry was the most likely place for an invasion because you had a big expanse of water. Most of the bays along the coast over are pretty small, and you need a big expanse of water to bring in that many ships and moor them and manoeuvre them, and then you need beaches to land the troops, and these were the only beaches around Bantry where they could go ashore on the beaches here. So that's why they fortified here to prevent them coming in. But I'll show you more about that later on. So now, yeah, Whiddy Island, we're often asked what the meaning of Whiddy Island is. In the very, very old maps, it's down as Fusida Infila. Does anyone know what that means? No? But in the...
What language?
Or the cartographers, the people in Lisbon, and yeah, the Portuguese, they were great map makers, and that's I'm sure that's their language. But I knew Whiddy. In Irish, it is Whiddy, and Irish they think is Fui Tida, beneath the sea, and the reason given for it was the last ice age here was 12 or 14,000 years ago, and there were huge glaciers all over Europe and England and that, and we had them here in Bantry Bay as well. And when the ice began to go back and melt, the waters of the ocean raised about 15 feet, and a lot of Whiddy would be beneath that 15 feet, and maybe the low-lying places were covered with water, and they called it Fuitida, beneath the sea. Others say it is a Scandinavian name because the Scandinavians were here about in those times, and they took lots of slaves, captured slaves, and particularly they were interested in women, females. They took and they stored them on islands like that island there, or other small islands down the bay, and kept them there with people as prisoners, and then shipped them away when they'd have a couple of shiploads. But they were in the bay for a long time, and there's an island down in Castletown again, which is known as Dursey Island, and they say that's Tarsi, E meaning island, and Tars is the Roman god of thunder or something, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and that area out here in front of us, plus the island, is always known as Fundy. You wouldn't hear it lately now, but all the old fishermen would call it Fundy, that they were fishing around Fundy. And Fundy is another one of the gods' islands. So you can have a pick why they call it Whiddy. Whiddy sounds an odd name for a place. The oldest man-made item or building is Kilmore. There's a ruin of a church down at the other end of the island, Kilmore, and there's a graveyard there, and that's built in the 6th century, and the ruin of it is still there. Now, up to the time we were talking about the 1600s and that, Bantry and Whiddy and all around West Cork was completely Irish. There were very, very few English coming here, for the reason that we were very remote from Cork, and we were surrounded with forest and all that, and there wasn't much of a living here. But the pilchard fish came on the scene then, and in 1591 one of the O'Sullivan bears who owned the place leased Whiddy Island to two Englishmen, Brogley and Devonshire. And Whiddy was very important in the fishing. Pilchards were a herring-like fish, and they came in vast shoals, huge shoals, and you'd need high land to see them in the water. You just didn't put out your net. They moved about all the time, the huge shoals. So from a high area you'd see where they were, and they had a fellow that they'd call a hewer. I don't know, he'd call out anyway, a hewer, and he'd see from the heights of Whiddy, he'd see the fish in the water, and the men with the seines then would pull the nets around them, and there was a seine boat, and one called a follower who did the tidying up work, and they'd haul in the fish. And these English people came over, and again they made huge amounts of money in them, because there was a ready market for them, and they were all exported around Europe. Yeah. Another Englishman that came at the same time for the same purpose was Davenant. And he was a very important businessman in England, and his business went against him, and he was bankrupt, owing creditors £10,000. And rather than, as he was an honourable man, rather than jail him and that, they gave him so many years to make up the money, and he came over here, and in the space of 1 year he had the £10,000 made, and in 1600, that'll give you an idea what. So he made his money here and paid them off, and he lived here then for a while. He bought land around, and a son of his, John, married a girl by the name of Anne Boyle. I'm sure they were the Boyles of Cork, who owned Cork City and all that, and both of them were drowned out here in the Stormy. They were crossing the Bantry, and they were both drowned on the boat, from their boat.
When was that?
1641.
All right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, what I meant, 1641. At 1641 there was a big insurrection in Ireland. The Irish rose up, as they did frequently, to push the English out, and usually they failed. But there was a big uprising, and we had a lot of it here in our Bantry and that, but there was some of it came to the island, and I was reading about it. The native Irish attacked the English settlers here on the island in 1641, and Nat Naylor, they damaged all his lands and his pewter and his brass, etc. And Thomas Vyford, they killed his horses and cattle. Christopher Spearling, they took £80 from him, and there was an Anthony Blunt as well. They're just strange names. They're all English names. What's on the island now are Burkes and Shinahans and Minahans and that. But there was an Agnes Tucker, a widow lady who lived in Whiddy, complained that the O'Sullivan people went into the houses of several of the Protestant inhabitants and took their Bibles. If it was for the purpose of making themselves acquainted with the contents, one would be almost content to forgive them. But they threw the Bibles on the strand and threw stones at them. So, the poor people. No,
I hope they repented later.
they did, yes, they did. Yeah, it all usually blew over on you for another 10 or 15 years. At that time, with the pilchers, just to show what money and what industry was in the pilcher, there were 150 boats on Whiddy Island at that time, and they had 3 fish palaces, they call it. The palaces weren't palaces, but they were little buildings to process the pilchers. You could crush the oil out of them. They had ways of capturing the oil, and it lit lamps and did lots of things like that, and they exported the fish then. But there were 150 boats in Whiddy alone, And in all of Bantry Bay, there were 3,700 employed at fishing at that time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the population of the island at that time was 817 people, and it's now down to 20 or something like that, a small, low 20s. And I mentioned the deer park, and when the deer park was built here, they took over most of the good land on the island, and that led to 250 families having to leave the island. Have you enough yet, you haven't?
What happened to all the pilchards? Do they still come or they not?
That's the funny thing, that the pilchards were coming in steadily year after year after year, vast shoals. They disappeared.
They were
Never.
overfished, I think.
Huh?
They were overfished.
No. They couldn't overfish it those times with the small boats, you know, and just the small nets. They just disappeared. They're in other sides of the world. Occasionally, the fishermen that fish outside now with the trawlers, they'll catch an odd few with them. You know, they know they're a strange fish, but they absolutely disappeared. And they were unbelievable shoals. In our time now, we used to have the herrings coming in, shoals of them, or indeed the mackerel. Sure, most people would remember the mackerel. You could go down to the beach there when the mackerel were in with a bucket, and you'd bring up a half a dozen mackerel. They were so plentiful, and they followed the sprat in, and they came into the shallow water. But
that's what happened to overfishing.
well, that's what's happening now. Yeah.
Yes, but
Well, that happened to the
same thing
mackerel
happened then too, I
The
believe.
mackerel were here years ago, and they vanished as well. The mackerel did.
Yeah, they vanished because at the mouth of the bay, you had the fishing boats putting 6 and 7 and 8 and 10 miles of netting. Maybe they'd catch the boat. And I have another writing somewhere, I might have it there, talking about the boat and telling the division the crews and the boats would get, and tis very amusing. You'd want to have a calculator and be a mathematician to divide it out. I don't know how the people, but I might read it later on.
Incidentally, Donal, we have a man from Newfoundland here, another part of the world for fishing.
Another, yeah, which was fished out also.
Yeah.
Yes, we dealt with that. Still dealing with it.
Huh?
Still dealing with overfishing.
Yeah. There you are. Anyhow, I'm almost at the end of that anyhow, but we'll be passing the school up over here, which was built in 1887 and closed in 1993. In 1826, just on education, the Irish race were always very, very keen on education. And even though the people that live now back, even before the 1800s, back to the 15th and 1600s, they had no money and just barely lived on the farms and that, or in the towns, but they always tried to get the children to school. And at that time, school was forbidden by English law. We had penal laws, and we were not allowed to build schools, and you were not allowed to be a teacher. So what the teachers did, they went out around the country under the fences, under the furze bushes and that, and that's why they got the name head schools. And they gave beautiful education to the children there. And people who visited Ireland in those days and wrote books on it afterwards said it was no surprise to come up to a little barefoot youth out the country when they'd stop their coach to speak to the youth, and the youth would converse with them in either Latin or Greek. They learned Latin and Greek and mathematics under bushes like that there now. Yeah, but so they built national schools then later on. But in 1826, in Whiddy, there were two schools. There was one in Tranaha. Thomas O'Shea was the teacher, and he had 52 pupils. And in Kilmore, Daniel O'Leary had 20 pupils. You know, out of a small island, that was a lot of people.
But were these schools in proper buildings, or were they hedge schools?
The head
They were
schools,
the
that's what they were
informal
called.
ones.
occasionally there might be a derelict house or something around in the country, and they'd go into that. There'd be no roof, or they might put a roof of straw or something on it. But generally it was under the fences with their slate pencils, and they got beautiful education.
Because when I come over the bridge under the oak tree there, on the left
Oh
of the
yeah,
bridge.
yeah.
So
There were
that's one
quite enough.
locations we know
There
of.
were 20 or 30 of them all around
Yeah.
Bantry. But only the other day I read about that. But there was, I'm going away from it, there was one just with a famous man here in Ireland, Healy. There's a pass through the mountain over called after him, Tim Healy Pass. But his grandfather came to Bantry teaching in the Bridewell Lane. There he got a derelict building there, and he was teaching a type of a head school again, but it was a building with no roof on it. And his way of punishing the children for not knowing their lessons, he had a rope, and he put the rope around their waist and threw the end of it up over the rafters and swung them up, and then got them swinging, and every time they passed him he leathered them with the stick. The top of a car. And he kept that up for a long time until his wife, who was a very dear lady, happened to come down someday, I suppose, with his coffee and found him below, and he killing the children. But that's the way they learned then.
That's
Yeah.
famous Tim Healy, isn't it?
Tim Healy,
And there's
politician.
there's a
And,
plaque to him at the Irish
yeah,
Bank of Ireland.
Bank of Ireland.
yeah, he was an MP in England, as were all those people on
He
the
was the
flag.
first Governor
Anyhow,
General of Ireland.
we're not making any progress. 1961, illumination came to Whiddy when the ESB came here. It came to Bantry, I'd say around 1950, but 1961 it came in here. 1965, oh yeah, I put that down there, 1965, secondary education was deemed free in Ireland, and it had a devastating effect on Whiddy. Up to that date, people wouldn't get secondary education unless they afforded it, and very few would afford it. And from then on, it was free. So all the kids in Whiddy, when they came at 12 years of age, their parents said, well, we'll get you educated, and we'll get you out of the island, and you'll have nice livings and all that, and you can come back and take over the farms. So the children were sent into Bantry every morning on the boats, and began to stay in Bantry. It was more convenient to go in out the wet days, so eventually they all stayed in Bantry and would come back out for the weekend, and they got their education, they got the taste of mainland and the freedom of the mainland, and they never came back to the island again. With the result that you had very few young people on the island, and the population gradually went down. And added to that now, since the school is closed, the young kids are sent in at 5 years of age, and they're townies in no time, and then they go on to secondary after that, and they don't come back to the island. So it means that the island is a dying place where it should be thronged with people, so close to the Bantry and that. 1969, the Whiddy oil terminal came, and they purchased 320 acres to build the tanks on, and that was a third of the island, and that brought vast employment again to the area. But strangely enough, the island did not profit from the employment and that, and it didn't give the island any boost at all. Very few of the island people were employed on the it was mostly locals and people who came from elsewhere, people that had experience in oil refineries and that, they came here, you see. 1982, running water came to the island from Kinmore Lake. Anyhow, that's all now. I've on that. We've a nice walk now.
You had to go around your waist and
This
leave
was the thing here, wasn't it? The handle.
Yeah, proper pump here.
about that pump is
The old
200 years old.
VO country
That's right, they were there.
William Carter's a good that is actually.
You know, so I can get. I have to sit down here.
I look for the stone.
Be very careful if you're walking because you don't know what's under the grass. Now there could be, that well it goes down 200 or 300 feet, and I suppose there's other holes that are going down as far. And we have no possible way of getting up over it.
water pump there as well one time.
Yeah. A small little bit of information about these things. I told you about the French invasion, and coming up into the bay, there were some of the ships came up outside here, but they weren't able to get the soldiers ashore, and the eastern wind blew them all out of the bay, but shortly, and they had to go back to France. So the invasion was over, but the English were always afraid then that another invasion would come, and there was one planned. It was planned to come immediately after that. They were very heartened when they came over, that they came over so easily, and there was another invasion planned, and the English said we better fortify the area here, and like I explained to some, Bantry Harbour was the likely place the ships would come to because they needed beaches to land 25,000 men and equipment and guns and all that down the bay. You had there's all rock along the shores there, and there's no way you could land ships, and even if land crew from ships, and even if you did, the road coming up from there at that time was appalling and through Glengarry, and they wouldn't make any headway on the road. So the English, being worried, they set up what they call temporary batteries, and they had a number of them around. They had one at Eagles Point where the caravan park is, in Eagle, one there, and they started building those in 1803. And in those, that one, there were 5 24-pounder cannons. The 24 pounds mean the shot that was put into the cannon to be fired was 24 pounds weight. So they had 5 of those, and they had 4 12-pounders. But all they did at that time was they built up earthen defences, fast jobs, and put the guns in place, and they were only a temporary one. They had one there. There's one in Gusting Row, up high on top of McGrath's land over the Vaughan. I thought you used to go down there. Up on the very highest point there, we were up in it the last day. When the hot golf course, there's a whole golf hole up just near it anyhow, and there was one there with a little bar of sand that's out there. That it's covered at high tide. Well, in those days that was about 1.5 acres in extent, and it was 25 feet tall in places, you know. And they had another one there, and then they had a temporary one here as well. So they were in line here, and that would prevent anything coming up around the point of Whiddy and into Bantry Harbour there. They'd shoot them out of the water. And from the other side of this thing, they were able to shoot over towards Arnagashel. The 24-pound one could shoot the thing 2 miles, and it's roughly 2 miles between here and Arnagashel. So nothing could come up there according to them, and the one at Eagle Point again protected it. That was on the way in as well, so nothing could come in there. They also had a one on Seafield up in Bantry House Lawns, down on the edge of that. They had one there with they had only one 24-pound cannon there. I mean, if the ships had gone in, they were there, then there wasn't much you could do. But they had one there to stop it. And out on beach, where the airstrip is, they had one there, and they had 3 24-pounders and 2 12-pounders. And they also had one then where the the battery is out on the west of the island. So nothing could come in the beach entrance there because they could shoot from the island at you, or they could shoot from beach at you, and nothing could come in this way. So nothing could come in actually the Bantry Harbour in their estimation. And then about the same time they built larger fortifications down on Bear Island, which would protect the entrance to the bay, and if they came beyond that they'd have to get past our guns here. And over on Garnish Island and Glengariff, you know, the Martella Tower, and they had a battery, they call these things. They had a battery there as well as the Martella Tower. The Martella Tower served a slightly different purpose, but it could still be used to defend the place there. There were guns on it. So when the English got really worried, they said that they'd build proper ones, and this was 1803. They built one here, and there's one which we won't be going to, will be near us over here on the Easter Point, and one down by the Whiddy place, the oil terminal. There's a big one down there. I've a few pictures of those I'll show you later on. The one down by Whiddy now, the moat around that, like that's the moat on the outside there, the deep place. It's 25 feet wide and 26 feet deep, and 'tis lined with stone. And there's a parapet wall like we have here again, which 6.5 foot high and 13 foot wide. That's a big wide wall. The internal dimensions of the one below, it was 200 feet across, so they're fairly hefty buildings, you know. And there were 2 semicirculars building with a central corridor then inside in the fort there, and each building consisting of 5 single-story and they're surrounded by an 18-foot high wall. So along with having that wall, there's an 18-foot high wall in here and the one below. The 3 batteries are all differently designed, I suppose, to fit in with the location they were. Yeah.
Was any water in the moats?
No.
Wasn't it? Okay.
No. And in the new one they built down there, then they put 8 24-pound, and there were 100 soldiers stationed in that. And you couldn't get in below there now because it's overgrown and there's no bridge in like we have here, and the same applies to the other one. You can't get into them now without endangering your life. This one here now, this is Rena Vanny, and the one below is built on Rena Knock, Rena Knock, and this is Rena Vanny. And this is the largest of the 3, and you can see what's there anyhow. There's a classis around this one, 130 feet. A classis is the smooth land that's outside of this. The field we came along, you'll notice that's very smooth and regular, not like an ordinary field that'd be up and down. Well, that's specially levelled off like that, so that any invading person has nowhere to hide. And down at the end of that, then there's a little fence which goes all the ways around. Outside of that, you'd see that from the mainland, it goes all the ways around, so that anyone coming in would have to climb over the fence, and the men here with muskets and that could shoot them coming in. So there were 12 24-pound cannons in this one, and there were 150 men, so there was no scarcity of men in Whiddy at that time. The parapet wall here now is 14 feet thick, and it's 5 feet high, and the inner diameter here is 250 feet. And an interesting thing about this wall here then, that wall, the top of it slopes down gently, and you have the moat outside of it, and in the glasses, and from the sea if you wanted to look, if you looked up, you'd think the whole thing was one. It's all in line, so that if a person needed to shoot up, they'd have to shoot a cannon that would drop into the place here, and underneath those roofs, now there's armoury roofs in them now, but they had curved roofs, either of concrete or brick, so as if the cannon hit it, it wouldn't do as much harm, the ball hit it, if it hit it directly. So from below you'd notice it all looks the one thing, the parapet wall there, and the classes and all. You get what I'm trying to get at it? And the guns here, then there's a thing over there with the pot on top of it, and the guns were mounted on a thing like that. Usually you get the cannon guns in there, like in Bantry House, they're on wheels with a framework. Well, on this, they were mounted on this thing which is coming out of the ground, and there's a concrete base on that, and the front of the gun was attached to that, and the it could pivot, you could move the gun around then on the concrete base. There was wheels which would take it around in a circle, so that the gun could fire at an angle of 180 degrees. They covered the beak, otherwise the gun could only shoot straight ahead. And there are openings there where the cannons shot out through. You see them there, and they're all overgrown there now. And they also, you'll notice there, they have things which are called banquets. They were a place where there's something like what's over there now, but I think that's only a torn down place. They rated something like that there, where the men with muskets could stand up to get height there to shoot out over the parapet at anybody coming. Okay? And over here there was a drawbridge. They'd pull in the bridge at night. It wasn't like it's now.
Donal, when you said there were 150 men here, was that between the three batteries?
No. There were 150 soldiers here, there were 100 below, and I think there's 100 for the one above.
So
Yeah.
that's 350, is it, approximately?
Yeah, yeah. I get the other one out in a minute there, but there was 100 men stationed below,
Right,
and 150 here,
yeah. And would that be...
and I think about 100 at the other side, yeah. So they were fairly, yeah. Even as I say, in 180 degrees, so all the guns here could fire that way, so they were protecting the entrance to the harbour here, the eastern point of Whiddy. They'd shoot there. From the other side, they could shoot over to Arnagashel and the eastern point, and they could also shoot down the bay from that side and protect 2 miles of water there. And the other one further down, then you see, would overlap that could shoot up and cover the same 2 miles. So the whole thing was pretty saturated. That you, it says here that when these were being built, they had lots of horses and all that there, and there was an O'Mahony man, a contractor, I don't know who he was, but in December there was a fire in the stables and 25 horses died. So whether that's of interest or not, but they were the first, they were the only people to die here, because the batteries were never used for anything. The French never came back to the bay, and there was no more danger. And once the batteries on Bear Island were built, they were more modern, and they had more modern guns, and they were able to cover the bay, the mouth of the bay there, so nothing could come up, and these batteries fell into disuse. Now, so any questions?
Where did you get the materials? Because you don't know. Does anybody know where the materials for this place came from? If it looked like good quality slate, we wouldn't get around here.
Well, I'm told that, and there's some fine big stones, you know, very, very huge ones. Over across here, what's the point up beyond Arnagashel, the point there where you go into Glengarry? Or have you anything? Huh? Just under Arnatrush, and you're the point there.
Why lawn, is it? The rapid stone.
I don't know. But over there, anyhow, there's a cliff, huge cliffs of rock, and I believe the rocks crack that way. That you can get fine ones there. I was told that they got a lot of stuff there, and to build the pier, which we came out from now in Bantry, the stones are supposed to come from there. But then someone else said that a lot of the stone came from Wales. That they had ships over and back all the time, and they probably come over with stones and take back whatever would be export. And there's a quarry down back here by the sea, and an amount of stones came out of that, but not as much as would be that. Because did you notice that the outside, the moat, are stone lined? You know, there's a lot of stone went into it.
Are you referring to Adrigo quarry, the one that's so recent when you say a quarry near the sea?
No. When they were building these, there was a quarry just down
Oh,
here.
on the island.
On the island, yeah.
Oh, right.
There's a quarry down there. I don't know what the name of the town is. But
Is it still used as a quarry?
no.
Would it be called a slate quarry like the...
We're going to get a 3-minute summing up of the First World War, 1914-1918, in 1 minute. And that will be enough to, it'll be grand. I'm speaking to you now about a seaplane base that was down in the flat there. You can see bits of concrete there. Do you see here just underneath us? There's one slab of concrete. You can't? Yeah, you can, yeah. Well, that's part of it, and all the flat area over there is not concrete, but it's covered with grass. So, during the First World War, of course, the English had wonderful navy and all this, and they were able to blockade most of Europe, European ports, and that prevented the Germans from getting in food supplies and ammunition which they'd buy from neutral countries, including America. And but the English had the whole place tied up, the whole of Northern Europe, and the Germans were on the point of almost losing the war at that stage. So their inventors were working very hard at that time, and they invented a new machine, the U-boat, which is a type of submarine, the first of the submarines, and they mass-produced them and put them out on the Atlantic and around all the coast, and they created havoc with English shipping all around, and they said any ship that sailed the coast of Ireland or England or Europe was to be treated as a target for the U-boat, and they sang hundreds and hundreds of merchant ships belonged to the English, which mean that they weren't able to, didn't have ships to bring in food stuff for England or ammunition for the armies, or to transport guns and stuff to the soldiers fighting in Germany and France. So these U-boats were sinking ships all over the place, and the Lusitania was one of their famous sinkings. The Lusitania was an American liner which was plying between England and America in neutral states, so they weren't touched. But the Germans warned them that if they carried ammunition or explosives or that they treat them as a legitimate target. And they published that in the papers in America and warned people not to travel on the ship, but the Americans ignored it, and they secretly brought ammunition and guns and all this over to the English. So the Germans gave them the warning, and one day off the old Hurricane sail, the boat came along and they put one torpedo into her, and she went down with the loss of, I don't know, was it 1,500 people or something?
How did the Germans know that they were carrying
Well, you see, the Germans, like the English, knew everything that was happening. They had their spies, they had German Americans in America, like the English had English people in America, or the Irish and Irish. So really, you know what's going on, and it's debated like whether they should have sunk or not. I'm not justifying it, but I'm just giving the reason, because the strange thing about that day, the Germans put one torpedo into the Lusitania, and there were 2 explosions, and it's a mystery to this day what caused the second explosion. There's an American, after buying the wreck, he bought it about 10 years ago, and he wants to go down and plunder it, and the Irish government is not allowing him. But he one of his motives is to see if there were explosives on board, and did they blow out. If there was explosives there, they cause damage that a torpedo wouldn't. But it's believed that there were. But anyway, that's debatable also. So she was sunk on the 9th of May 1915, and 1,198 people perished. And that brought America into the war, and it swung the war completely in favour of the English, because they brought in their expertise and their money. And at that time, England didn't have any aeroplanes, and the Germans had developed the aeroplane and were using them, and the Americans had what do you call it, the Wright brothers, 5 or 6 years earlier had invented the first plane. So the Germans had airplanes and the English didn't. But the Americans came in and they looked over the thing, and they said that's what was needed actually, were planes that would patrol the bays and the coast and spot these U-boats and let the warships know, and they go out and deal with them. So they decided in Ireland then, we were a neutral country, but we were still under the British rule, and they decided to open these seaplane bases around the Irish coast. They opened one here, and there's one in Cove, and there were 2 of them in Northern Ireland, and one in a place called Ahada over there. And they came in here immediately and started building this. And it was in late 1917 this started to happen. I have a date there, if I can't find it. The war was nearly over, but they weren't to know that. So they built this one here. They imported everything. The buildings that were on it were brought over in sections from America and assembled there. They had huge hangars. The hangars went way back there, as far as the fence over there. And there were slipways then down into the sea where the planes would be pushed out. You could see some of the concrete blocks, but the slipways there on it, and around the corner again there are other slipways. So Ireland was ready for the plane, and it was Curtiss 2 H-16 large American planes. If any of you are plane fanatics, you'll know them. And they were 46 feet long and had a wingspan of 95 feet, and were powered by 2 400 horsepower Liberty 12 engines, and armed with 4 machine guns each. That was the first time they started putting guns in planes. The first planes that were used in the World War, the governments had no time for the plane, and they saw no future for it, and they let the Air Force have their way. They said they'll go nowhere anyway, and they'd put up the plane with men, and all they do is go back in the enemy lines and see troop movement, and they'd write it down on a paper, because they had no radio at this stage, and that would be dropped to their own people on the ground, and they'd make movements then to counteract those troop movements. And the planes going up had no weaponry at all. And after a while, the men going up, the Germans were up there and the English were up, and they all knew one another. They'd be waving and this, and they eventually they began taking up stones with them, and they throw them at one another above, and eventually they took up handguns, and they'd shoot at one another, causing damage. So that brought in the gun and the machine gun, and they discovered then, because a machine gun, it wasn't much good in a plane. If you fired it out the front, you were going to blow the propeller to pieces. And I forget his name now, but some fella invented a gun that could shoot while the propeller was spinning, to put a bullet out every time the blade would pass, and that changed the course of the war for planes. But these planes came here, these Curtis fellas, and they patrolled all the bay here and all the ways around the coast as far as Kinsale and up along past Kerry and that, and they reported any shipping, German shipping or U-boats or that, and they also picked up convoys of English ships that were coming and came across with them partways across the Atlantic. So they were using them quite a lot. And below here one day, one of the planes went out off the slipway and out, and when it was taking off, it crashed, and the pilot was killed. We had six planes, and that reduced us to 5. And a Whiddy man that I met here that had worked in the place told me the ships were just made of light timber lats covered with cotton fabric glued on, and they had no radio, they had no parachutes, and they were only just used for observation. And in Castletown they had what they called a balloon station, the big balloons that they used to tie over the ships to protect them. They had a station of that in Castletown. Yeah, I think that's all you need to know about it. But it was done anyhow, so we ran out of war after 9 months of being built, and the whole thing was dismantled, and the Yanks packed everything into cartons, into cases, and anything that could be shipped, the planes and that, and they were shipped back to America, and they had an auction then, and they sold beds and chairs and cutlery and all that. And I saw the other day a very fine wooden